Welcome to the Here's Waldo podcast, where we sit down with top visionaries and creatives in the video game industry. Together, we'll unravel their journeys and learn more about the path they're forging ahead. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hi, I'm Lizzie Mintis. I'm the founder and CEO of Here's Waldo Recruiting, and we are a boutique video game recruitment firm. This is the Here's Waldo podcast. In every episode, we dive deep in conversations with creatives, founders, and execs about their journey. You can expect to hear valuable lessons and get a glimpse into the future of the industry. This episode is brought to you by Here's Waldo Recruiting. We are a boutique recruiting firm for the game industry that values quality over quantity, transparency, communication, and diversity. Today, we have Sami Ramly with us. He is the founder of Echo Chunk and the creator of Echo Chess, the viral daily puzzle game where you are what you eat. He built the game's Blitz mode using AI real-time generation with a model he trained on game states to leverage AI as a co-pilot for game design. We'll have to dig into that more. And at the age of 3, Sami learned how to play chess, and he's been captivated ever since. Let's get started. Thanks for being on. And what we didn't even mention in your bio, you just raised $1.4 million. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you, Lizzie.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me too. I'm excited.
Me too. So for any of our listeners that haven't played your game, can you share a little bit more about the game itself?
Sure, yeah. So it's actually great because people who play it don't need to know any kind of chess. There's still like grandmasters who play it and enjoy it a lot, but it's pretty approachable. So best way to think about it is like it's chess puzzles, but you are what you eat. And what that means is that every time you're capturing a piece, you actually turn into that piece. So let's say you're a rook, you're going around the board, you just captured a pawn, you just lost all your rook abilities. Now you're stuck being a pawn, you can only go up. And then opposite is true. So think of it as one use only chess. There's obstacles around the board, and the goal is to clear the whole board. So you start with one color, there's no opponent, the pieces don't move, and you're just clearing your way around the board. But because of that echoing mechanism, hence the name of the game is like you turn into the echo of every piece you capture. Because of the echoing mechanic and the obstacles, it's very easy to get yourself stuck. And so you really have to think, okay, what is the right path to navigate through your captures? And every day there is a new classic puzzle that's kind of more, for like Waldo fans, people who are dabblers and like puzzles and just want something that's interesting. They're still challenging. And then there's an epic puzzle, which is more for, puzzle enthusiasts, pro chess players and so on. They're set every 24 hours in your local time zone. And as you mentioned, Lizzie, earlier, there's a blitz mode where you're racing against the clock. There is real-time random, clear kind of real-time random boards that appear. And you're eating your way around them, echoing. No matter where you end up, you will carry over that piece and tile for the next stage that gets randomly generated in real time. And every time you clear a stage, you win some time back. So kind of like in Tetris, you're trying to clear stages before you die, effectively. And people have been really enjoying this kind of roguelike approach to chess. There's people building insane kind of combos. If you get yourself stuck, you can shuffle them away, but you lose your combo. So you're really trying to like think through, how do I get the right piece for the next stage and end my board there. And people can play it for free on echochess.com, any device. It's like a web game, so you can download it anywhere. It's progressive web app.
Cool. Yeah, I'll have to play. I have to play games for my job.
That's awesome. That's exciting.
Researching. It is cool. Yeah, lots of people think it's very cool. So how did you come up with this idea?
Yeah, there's a lot of aspects to it, right? There's like, what's the journey that leads to, iterating on ideas like this? And then there's how do you get this particular idea, and then how do you know it's a good idea versus like a random idea. So I think rewinding a little bit, as you mentioned, like started playing chess very early, got really into strategy games, like just turn-based strategy games in general. I love like Heroes of Might and Magic. If anyone here has played this, probably like 20 years old at this stage, but still a very active player community. There's actually a really good mod called Horn of the Abyss. If anyone's interested, it's active PvP community. Amazing game. So we had a family PC. And I had older siblings, so I had to wake up super early just to get time on the one chair. I used to play this game. And then they actually have a hot seat multiplayer where you literally have to get out of the seat. Your friend comes in, sits, and plays their turn, and then they step out and play. And then, they have like a map maker. I used to make some custom maps. Anyway, point is that like I've always been into strategy games, but specifically turn-based strategy games. And I think there's something magical about them. And so I think one thing that I've kind of started noticing much more in my adult life as an adult gamer, very proudly and happily, is that there's almost like a decreased supply of really good strategy games these days that are actually different. And I think like it's because you see a lot of, I mean, I'm not complaining. There's a lot of remasters and sequels. I love them, but it's almost like a lot of interesting things that are just taken once more. And the interesting part, you ask yourself, like, does that mean that the demand is gone, or is it just that the supply hasn't caught up? And I really feel like there is like really latent demand for good puzzle games and strategy games. And you see that with something as old as chess, probably like, 2,000 years old, how old this game is, getting is kind of like a big resurgence, including with new generations. And you ask yourself, like, why? What is it like? There's no kind of fresh ideas in this space. And then consequently, what would lead to like more fresh ideas and be able to iterate faster? And I think there is really something about being able to shorten like the learning cycle, being able to just do like multiple ideas and iterate. And I can talk a lot about iteration. And I think probably like, the last big kind of novel thing on the medium as a whole, probably, with like Dungeons and Dragons, Gygax, Dave Arneson, they came up with like, let's quantify imagination, put some numbers on things and just roll some dice or something. And I feel like there's moments where the medium can evolve as a whole. So anyway, long story short, that's how I started tinkering with this space as a whole. Like, okay, like turn-based strategy game, and then you approach it from puzzle games first, strategy game first. I have a lot of thoughts on this, and iterating on this. And so getting to like, how do you get to echo chess in particular, and why this mechanic first? So I think there's three things there. I think one part about chess in particular, probably like contrarian, people might strongly disagree. That's fine. I'm just like random guy on the internet. You don't have to agree. But I feel like chess is a fantastic medium. But because it had like centuries to optimize and there's a highly competitive scene, it's almost like there's a meta that emerges. And now, I mean, unless you're on like the top end of the game, basically you're just memorizing openings, you're kind of recognizing mate and X maneuvers. And the kind of early game and like the late game are kind of pinned to certain things. And there's still a lot of thinking, obviously, but that creates a certain meta you're playing. And if you're a newcomer, I'm not going to memorize all this chess theory. I don't know what I'm doing. And so I think basically there ended up being some kind of unintentional gatekeeping. So I think first thing, I wanted to have a very easy to learn, very hard to master game, have like that kind of strategic depth of chess without making it confusing, overwhelming, or like, like people getting PTSD from like, I tried chess once when I was a kid, not for me. I don't think of myself as a chess player. I think second thing was basically that echoing mechanic. And I feel like in most games, I don't feel the same way, Lizzie, but like, whether it's like, FPS, RPG, whatever the game is you're playing, whatever the game genre, usually if there's a concept of some opponent or enemy, you're effectively either like, kind of circumvent the enemy, just escape, beat the enemy, and just continue. And you never really have to deal with the consequences. You just bullied your way through some enemies in chess. Their queen, just capture a bunch of pieces. So I wanted to play with the concept, like, what if you just actually have to step into that opponent's shoes, and now you get to deal with the consequence of you just lost all your abilities, you just stuck being a pawn. And the opposite is true. If you're like a pawn, you can usurp like a king or something, now you get more of an interesting take on it. I was talking to some friends after, and I think the closest I can think of, I'm sure there's a lot of games that have toyed with this, but the closest I can think of that tangentially has this kind of concept I think is neat is Hitman, where you probably defeating someone and then maybe you get their clothes and equipment. But, if you kind of stretch the imagination, I think that's an interesting mechanic. And honestly, the third one is just having whatever makes chess interesting, plus the fact that it's a universal language. That if people haven't played chess, they've probably seen it at some point in their life. So there's no language barrier. There's no like kind of having to get hung on like, okay, how do I even move to get started? And you can really get to the interesting part, and you can still have like kind of depth of strategy. So anyway, I'm gonna pause there. That's kind of the gist of the story here, but hopefully that makes sense.
But what pushed you to really, I mean, many people have ideas, everyone has ideas, but very few people really execute them. So I want to know more about, you play a lot of games, you're 3 and, a youth. And then how did you go from having these ideas and being an avid game player to starting your own company and raising money?
Yeah. Honestly, I don't know if anyone can answer this question with full consciousness, because you're trying to attribute things to how things evolve and connecting the dots backward.
Yes.
But I can tell you with a lot of bias of how I recall these moments. I think there's probably 2 ingredients. Like I think you need some kind of intense dissatisfaction with the status quo. Whatever, you're playing a lot of these games. Okay, like cool. There's something there. Yeah, like basically someone should solve this problem.
Yes.
Might as well be me. And then I think as part of that, it's exciting to be part of something that's much bigger than yourself. It's not just like might as well be me, but might as well try to make a dent here by starting something where you can get other smart people and other people who are passionate about it. And then you have a greater whole, and then together you can do something that's much bigger and multiple games and so on. And
Yeah.
and I think the second part is you just have to honestly start somewhere. I think we're honestly very fortunate. We take it for granted a lot. I think that was probably a few generations plus minus. We take it for granted that we are just really on the shoulders of giants, what they say. And we have the internet. We have tools. We have AI now that can shorten the learning cycle a lot. We also have these platforms, and it's really like easier than ever to just at least start getting the ideas out of your head and into the world. And and then they bounce into the actual real test, which is other humans and someone who's not biased. And if you don't get over that first hump, and it's just definitionally it's impossible to get there.
Yeah. But it's interesting. I like to talk to entrepreneurs. Lots of people are just satisfied. So it's always interesting to hear about what made you start. But I like that you said you have this passion, you have this long-term interest, and you have a bigger vision, because I feel like no company can really succeed if your goal is just, to make money, unless maybe
100%.
you're in finance and making money for other people. That might be
Yeah,
the
but
exception. Yeah. But you still have to have a purpose. Like, why are you doing this? What do you want to solve? And who will love what you're making?
very true. And I think honestly, like the whole thing about we take for granted, like what we have, I really feel this way. I mean, when was the last time we thought about, oh my God, fridges? You know what I mean? Like we
Yeah.
just, okay, there's a fridge, grow up, there's a fridge. I don't think anyone remembers the appearance of fridges. But there was a time where people used to literally go on like month-long journeys to transport salt from across the world just to keep meat dry, or go get ice cubes, ice blocks on ships, and we just take it for granted. And I think the fact that literally anyone these days can just have an idea, and it might be a shitty idea. We just start with something, just get it out of your head. You get the real human, and then you're able to do some prototypes and get it out in the world and iterate faster and faster.
Yeah.
That's a really nice privilege that we have that 100 years ago people did not have. And I think people should just put their ideas out in the world more and iterate. I think iteration is highly, highly underrated here.
Okay, so I want to know your like very initial idea. What was that? And then how did you prototype that idea? And
Okay, great question. It's two-part. There's like elements of the initial idea that I can happy to talk about, and there's elements that we're actually reworking in different ways, so they'll be coming at some point.
Okay.
So stay tuned. But I'll give you a glimpse of it. So I think there's usually when you think about the process of game design or any kind of design process, just design more broadly. If you really want to simplify, there's like an additive way or a subtractive way, right? Like you think about, you have clay or Play-Doh, you add a bunch of things. 3D printing, you just add one layer at a time, whatever, and then you keep building towards something. And then you have like the subtractive, it's kind of like sculpting. You have a block of stone, and then you chunk up stuff, and then you keep something. And I think like the interesting part here, I learned the hard way in the process, that actually a lot of really interesting ideas start from sculpting, because there's just so many things that that you have as signals and parameters these days, that actually getting to the real kernel that is the fun kernel that actually is interesting is like a process of removal. And so the first iterations were actually more complex, and complex in the sense that basically there's a lot of really interesting complexity, but also there's sometimes complexities that actually get in the way of you being able to enjoy the actual aha moment of a game or mechanic before you even get interested enough. And so if you think about, okay, how can I keep forcing myself to remove things like stochastic enemies, things that have to do with asymmetric movements, but just remove some of these things and keep what actually makes this game interesting, or this kind of insight I'm trying to see through this block of stone. Like there's some dissatisfaction, there's some kind of general insight I'm trying to manifest somehow in this design process. And by definition, fully formed yet, because you're brainstorming and iterating, creating, but just try to force more constraints in the design process. And then the brain works in interesting ways where you put yourself in this mindset where you start finding interesting, what if we do this, like this assumption, whatever, and you find things around it. It's kind of very theoretical. So now, practically, what does that mean? It literally means something like that, like a physical thing, just mess around with it. And so literally the first prototype was actually, I think it's probably the same wooden board, but basically it's like you just get something to put your ideas out of your head into the world, and then play around with things. So to give you an example with Echo Chess, very practically, there's obstacles around the board that you can't pass through. And you just need to prototype this. I mean, sure, you can write something super quick, like a few lines of code, but before that, just put an obstacle, doesn't matter, right? So just put sideways pieces on the board, reduce the size, whatever, just get people to try it. And I had to get an extra set of pieces from like eBay, just because you can't have 5 queens on normal chess. You just need a bunch of extra pieces, just iterate and try stuff. But then the second part becomes, okay, like you've tried all of these, like basically you're the game engine, honestly. pretend to be the game engine and move things around as people are playing, which again, like go back to Dungeons and Dragons, like that's a major innovation. They started, the dungeon master or game master. You don't need to build all this stuff before you have it. Interestingly, that was the other way around. This was a technological constraint, and then now there's like virtual DMs. But I think the same thing applies. And I think that for the first prototype and on a virtual environment, again, if you see the first version of EchoChess, like you just, what is this? It's just embarrassing. I think that, like a saying, I forgot who said, maybe Reid Hoffman or someone, that like if you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you ship too late. So we definitely did not ship too late. Like we iterated from there. I think like, yeah, I think that one last thing I'll touch on that. I think in the game industry I've been seeing is, and I think it's been changing recently, which is great. But I think historically there's been hesitance for people to put things out for others to try them before they're fully baked. And sometimes, it's like 7-8 years. And I think that's fair in some situations. Also, I think Hollywood has this kind of model, like it's a new movie, like some creative director. I think that's fair. But I like to invite people to think about, is this the only model, right? And do you have to do this for every slice or chunk of the whole creative process? Because, like the tech way of doing it, the startup way of doing it is like almost the opposite, right? People in Silicon Valley have been like almost brainwashed to a point where like, A/B testing, lean startup methodology, like just, put something out there, like, Wizard of Oz kind of prototype. And I think there's like almost two mental models. And they have like very good reasons on both sides. And obviously, make 3D real-time games is different than just putting a landing page. But there is something in there to be said about where the tools are today and what that process could look like.
Yeah, that's a huge commonality on the podcast that people say. Get user feedback really early. Okay, so you had your first prototype, which was embarrassing for you later, but you put it out there. And then how did you recruit people to prototype your game? How did you know, I guess, when you've had enough feedback, or did you get feedback that was just transformative? And then like, how do you know when your iteration process basically is done?
Yeah, no, excellent question. Well, in reality, no one can know, like from
the perfect time.
Yeah, yes. What you can know, and I think there's definitely an answer there, is what are some leading indicators that can give you some indication of something, like, okay, this is like on the right track or not on the right track. And then there's some like lagging indicator where, like, okay, I put this game out, it's been like 6 years, not a single soul cared to play it. I mean, okay, sure, but it's lagging. And ideally, you need more into leading indicators. Yeah, so I think the question is probably more like, okay, how do you identify leading indicators, or how do you hunt for them versus shying away from them? And then where do you find people to play, and where do you start? Where you have something like your bedroom, whatever, where do you start from there? So I think honestly, it doesn't matter. Just get humans, anyone who's not yourself. There's an interesting thought experiment, actually. I'll get back to the first part, but I think this is interesting. I was talking to someone recently. I think it was probably one of the Snapster folks. They're awesome, these guys. But the thought experiment was, doesn't matter who is the person who playtests the very first version, right? And okay, we're just talking about this. And through this thought experiment, that I've been thinking a lot more since, basically, what if you had clones of Lizzie? And I'm not talking about just like removing the bias, right? Because you could say, well, you get someone else is not going to be biased, or we need the wisdom of the hordes, or, more people, you have more like, but what if you remove the element of someone else's perspective? You just get like 100 Lizzie clones. And the question is the real Lizzie well equipped to provide judgment on something Lizzie is creating compared to a clone of Lizzie? I mean, the clones, right? In theory, it shouldn't matter. And I really feel like it does matter. I feel like even if you found people that were exactly like you, ideally don't, just find people diverse in your audience. But the point I'm trying to make is that even if you were to ask your own self, what do I think of this? If you're able to dissociate fully, I think you get much more objective feedback, because by definition, you're just tied to it. It's your baby, you're building it. But I think even if you're able to somehow shut off that brain process, I think there's still something about the mind is in two states. The mind is either in like kind of like, creative, brainstorming, critical, thinking about all the different perspective things, or it's in building execution mode. And so if you have this idea and you're trying to make it real with coding or whatever, you just really think about how do I get from like this thing to something very deterministic and well-defined, versus someone who's looking at it with special eyes, even if it's yourself or a clone of yourself, they're thinking about the opposite, which is basically, what is this? Why isn't it not X? Oh, I don't like how it reminds me of Y, all these different things. And so I think, yeah, to answer that whole question, just start somewhere that's not yourself, even just your family, friends, whatever, and then get to actual strangers as quickly as possible. Okay, so first question, let's say I can find those people. How do I think about the iterative process in a way as to like, get myself to find more leading indicators that are actually insightful, and then get the most of this. What you let me know if I'm messing up the questions.
Oh, that's perfect. You said it better than I did.
Sorry. Thanks, Izzy. So this is something I think intentionally we did well with this process. I hope to do it with other games as well, or game
Yeah.
modes. When you think about what is the boundaries of a prototype, you asked earlier, when do you know when it's done? When is
Yeah.
it good? And you're saying all these philosophical things, but I think at some point, pragmatic, you have to say, okay, this is what we're shipping, and then it's first version, first release. So I think no matter what school of thought people want to follow to just define that first version, highly encourage, at least from like our experience, that also includes a way that makes it very easy for folks trying this to be able to just express whatever they try with someone else, or share it to someone, or send it to a friend. And that's a very deliberate product decision, right? Because it's very easy to say, like, let's first try like the mechanic, or let's first come up with a theme. Same with board games. You can start with themes or mechanics, or let's start with whatever. As opposed to board games, where just you play a game, you can't just invite a friend or share results with a friend or whatever. With digital stuff, and these days everything we have is platform, it's so much easier to just add an element of like get someone else to also try it. And I think deliberately thinking through this from the very early prototype is important. And then here's why. But it can also backfire, if you like do something that's like really not enjoyable at all, and then you just try to like go out with a bang. I'm not saying this. I'm just saying, like, even with the first cohorts of users, just getting some of that. I think because if someone tried your game and enjoyed it enough, but just does not want to break your heart, like, okay, yeah, sure, that was fun, even if they're a stranger. But if like they're also going out of their way to send it to a friend, and they're playing with someone else, even if they can't play together, like just single player, I think that's like an actual leading indicator, right? And so then you can get a better sense earlier on versus waiting 6 years and then no one likes your game. So I would encourage people to just spend a bit more time thinking, okay, like, what is that sharing process or like social interaction process, and then just put in the time to put it in, even if it's just very janky at the beginning.
And how did your game go so viral? What do you attribute that to specifically?
Well, I think, to be honest, like, through the process, and like what I just described with that, if someone organically in the game itself can just share the results with a friend and it has a link to go back to the game, I think there's just, you can't manufacture word of mouth, but you can definitely like fuel it or hurdle it. You can just be like, okay, you guys want to talk about this game, but you can't. Well, that sucks. Or like, you want to actually share this, and then here's the easiest way to do it. And then obviously we're very far from what we would want to do to get people have a smooth way to invite their friends, have leaderboards, like social kind of co-location, or all sorts of ways you can think about for having more of that collaborative element and competitive element. But I think there's a starting point with this. That's one thing I think is something we can do intentionally. The other part is, as I mentioned at the beginning, starting with that sculpting design process, where you think, okay, what is like the actual core, even if it's like stupidly simple, that will resonate with enough people, and then really answer the main problem here, which is like, how do you make chess interesting and turn-based strategy games and like things that are like brainy to people who would definitely enjoy them. They just wouldn't think of themselves as like that category. I think same way in Zynga, you wanted to do like games people don't think themselves as gamers. I think it's an excellent insight. I think there's a similar insight with things that are more strategy games and that genre and puzzle games, where like most people just have a knee-jerk reaction to them because of whatever first try they had with them. And actually, there's something almost universal about the nice feeling when you try something and you kind of 5 minutes, you figure it out, like 10 minutes, whatever, and it makes you feel good. It's like, oh, that was nice. And you can move on with your day. You can be like a hedge fund manager. You can be a very busy person, busy this week, doing all these excellent stuff and like, recruiting and leading conferences and all these
ballooning.
Yeah, hot air ballooning. And you might still do that. And to be fair, like, I think we still are iterating a lot on this. For example, like it's a daily puzzle. So there are better ways we could do around like the difficulty ramp within a week. People can expect, like, if I come in on like X day, I'm gonna get the harder one. The first time experience when you come in, like getting something where kind of you tip your toes and then you get into the other ones. And so there's a lot of things to be done there, but I think definitely that helps as well.
And how, you mentioned Zynga, and you're backed by the Zynga head of AI, the Zynga.
No, actually, Mark, the founder. Yeah.
The
So
founder. Okay,
yeah,
even better. I would love backstory on like 2 questions. How did you decide you needed to raise money? Like, what is that point? And then how did you come across the founder of Zynga?
Well, okay. Well, I think first of all, we have like extremely grateful. I can't say it enough. I think they're awesome, and then they're all amazing, honestly. There's obviously the A16Z, like speedrun folks. There's Steph, who's the head of AI at Roblox, amazing. Patrick Pride, he had worked on very early Warcraft, Starcraft, Diablo, like the strategy games expert. AJ from Knapster, Eric Wu started Open Door. Anyway, basically this whole group of people are just absolutely amazing. I feel very grateful, and the whole team like is very excited about this. These are very awesome folks who have built great companies and like great products. But I think it's also that they're honestly world experts in a particular intersection of fields that is very relevant to what we're trying to build. We didn't get a chance to talk much about the blitz mode and AI and all the things we think about longer term, but I think having people who are experts in strategy games and also AI and thinking about the use of game and tech, to get games accessible for everyone, I think it's very powerful, especially when you start thinking also getting the tools that we use and we'll use in other games to allow the player base to also create themselves, the creators as well. I think there's a lot of amazing things to be done there. So now let me tackle the part about investment. I think there's many ways people can think about any product, not just in the game industry, but let's just talk about games. I think people say okay, I want to try to build a game, and it could be just a board game, a game, video game, whatever. And also you can think about, okay, I'm trying to build a company. And then the reason this makes sense is because we'll be able to bring to the world a lot of what makes this first game super fun, but in a much bigger vision. And then eventually the process and tech that we're using to build this game, we know that it'll put us in a great spot to be able to come up with great games in the future and game modes, but also to be able to empower others, whether it's in our own player community, the UGC content, or honestly just other creators and devs long-term to benefit from it as a platform. I think there's a lot of things to be said there. So if you don't mind, I'll just use this a quick segue to talk about how I think about AI's role in game design.
Please.
Okay. So I think let me start kind of a bit more like the other. I've talked a lot about like bottom up and very practical, literally wooden chessboards. Let me talk about like a bit more like the longer term vision. I'll tell you the kind of how we're building toward this and what our strong opinions are toward it. So I think like longer term, there's been a lot of basically really interesting approaches in the industry. People trying to take chunks or Lego pieces and the game dev cycle and say, okay, where could something like AI or automation improve that process, right? And I think that's awesome. Like, a lot of them, are personal friends, I try to use as tools, or people want to partner with. I think it's amazing. For example, you can take like textures, text to textures, or text to voice, or 3D models, animation, shaders, whatever. Insert something, and then you can think about how AI or some other technology can actually help you build that ingredient better. And I think that's great, right? But I think the interesting part there is like the same way that any other technological shift has happened in the past. Over time, thankfully, hopefully this happens, but each of these ingredients will get improved enough that it kind of raises the baseline. Like if you're creating a feature-length movie today, probably not going to do it in black and white, unless you just try to send a message specifically, like very artistic way. It's great, but it's almost like table stakes, right? And I think that kind of the industry rises. And I think there's a lot of interesting that happened there where you can argue, okay, does this mean that there's a very interesting platform shift happening and then be part of that, the first non-silent movies or whatnot? Or is it more kind of like a situation where you have, remember those mini CDs, whatever they're called? Not the CDs, the one that are smaller. They probably have 2-3 years to shine and then we just moved on to something else, right? And so I think I think there's something about what is it that's going to be like a new baseline? And then the question becomes, is the way we actually make games going to be different? Even from a recipe perspective, if you think about ingredients and recipe. And I do think that and again, let's just say all these ingredients need to also improve, that's great. But whether they improve today or not, or whether you have hodgepodge of things that are automated, things are not, can you actually innovate on the game design process and coming up with a new mechanic? Like you're not on this, literally on this podcast, you can say, hey, let's come up with a chess variant where pawns move sideways. Sure. Is it fun? I don't know, right? It's just iterate on it. And so the question is how do you get a better recipe to iterate faster and be able to get learnings and do something where you can have automation helping you with the game design process. And so the insight that came across as I was building EchoChess, and especially the blitz mode of it, which is basically this real-time generated mode, is that at least if you start with a certain category of games, and you can be a little bit of where you start, and then you can expand naturally to other categories of games, is basically what you could do is you can have kind of a co-pilot of some sort that actually can learn to recognize certain game states and give you input on. So I'll tell you something very concretely with EchoChess, going back from the very long-term vision to Earth, right? Yeah. Okay, with EchoChess right now, what happens with when you're playing this Tetris-like mode, basically you're able to pre-generate a bunch of different board states. And if you think about levels of any game or maps, mods, whatever, a level is just a special case of a game state, where it's just the starting game state, right? But actually every single move you can do the same thing, right? And so you take a certain level kind of starting point, right? In theory, if you had a model or a process with AI or other technologies that is able to look at this and be like, this looks like a solvable state. This doesn't look like a solvable state. The same way, you're able to recognize cats and dogs and whatever. And then what you're able to do is, you see enough of them, now you're able to just pre-generate and then get interesting scoring around, okay, what do these states mean for what I'm trying to measure for the game? And so like you're able to actually do this in a fully decoupled away from like what is the actual game state. Like it's irrelevant. It's like it's a process that actually is generalizable, right? And I think especially if you start with like deterministic, perfect information games, like it doesn't matter if it's like a Sudoku, like a maze, a puzzle, like or any kind of like strategy game map, but basically the insight is the same. And if you go to like non-deterministic, non-perfect information games, you can do a similar process with expected values and so on. But basically my point is that even like just giving you a glimpse from like the first superficial element is that we're able to have someone like a sidekick who's able to look at these states, not just, by the way, the starting level, as I mentioned, as you're going through a game, and then give you feedback in real time on how is this state likely to evolve. And so when you come to something like Blitz mode, which is like a very early game mode, just clearing the boards, we're able to do this actually at speed where you're able to, before you even serve something to the player, have a point of view on is it a good state to show or not, and adjust accordingly. They might just like throw away some pre-gens and then adjust other ones. And then on the creation side, I think this is what's interesting, but we use some of this stuff internally as well as we're coming up with like those like, humanly created, like this is the one puzzle that's gonna go for the world, whatever. It's always, it helps you surmount the blank canvas problem if you just start with something that's kind of like a seeded, state. And then you can, I do feel like, by the way, for daily things, there is value in having like someone try to like tickle your brain or trick you behind the game. You're like, yeah, like there's someone trying to give me a message, as a human. So, but you can do like most of the legwork with like kind of having seeds. And more importantly, if you have that process, you're able to surface it to your own player base for creating their own maps, as well as like future creators to come up with interesting modes and so on. So anyway, I don't know if that was too high level, but like hopefully it gives you an idea of like how a process that has seen enough of certain game states can be very helpful as a copilot in the creation process. And I think that that's kind of like independent or in addition to whatever innovations happen on like ingredients, some sense of like game devs, and arguably probably beyond just games, how people think about what are the things that we need as Lego pieces and what is the Lego making process.
Yeah. Did you have most of this concept yourself or with the help of, I know you have some amazing investors and advisors that have so much experience. Do they tickle your brain and push you to new places like this?
Oh, of course.
Like that term.
No, of course, but
I'm gonna use it. Yeah.
Yeah, please use it, please. I don't even know like where I heard this term, or it just came up now, but please use it. Yeah, no, obviously, by the way, like these things like take a village. I think you said it very well at the beginning of this podcast. As you said, like, ideas are everywhere. They're almost like they're cheap,
Yeah.
and people can come up with like a million ideas per second. And when does the idea actually shape itself? So I think like that insight, or any other insight, you have to always couple it with like right timing for things. If someone had mentioned the same insight like 100 years ago, well, like a cool story, but like, what can I do about it? Not much, because like the tech wasn't there, right? And I think like it's important to kind of think through not just like in absolute terms your game, but like, things you're building as a game or a company, whatever, as part of like the underlying platform shift that's happening, and what are things that actually are enabled by this, what are things that are actually disabled by this. And I think like you brought up Zynga earlier, I think it's a great example, like, they spotted like, mobile and social as like a really good platform. I mean, I'm probably gonna like, I'm not giving enough credit to all the amazing things they've done, but I think one thing that they've done really, really well, in addition to a gazillion, you have to do so many things right, and it takes a village, and you have to concentrate. But I think that the underlying insight, which I think was brilliant, that they had was like basically, if I want to play a multiplayer game, right, and you have to go back in time, right, like pre-Facebook and such. If I think want to play a game, I have to think about, okay, I have a game that I'm building, and then I have to find my friends, and I go get my friends and invite them. And there's two things I'm doing that are just very like antithetical almost. And then I have to build my social graph for this game. And they're okay, like, what if the social graph is figured out, right? There's a social platform, and I can bring the game. And then same thing for like mobile, people have access to these things. So I think that's like a brilliant insight, but on its own, it's not enough. And you need to iterate so much. And like, this thing that's fantastic as an example, they iterate like ruthlessly, constant experiment, and they keep doing a lot of these things, and like, they've brought on amazing talent over the years and built up like an institution almost, right? But I think the insight alone is never enough. And by the way, like the devil's in the detail, like whatever I just described, you just said like, okay, like you're assuming probably, or we're both assuming that this process is going to be bulletproof as an AI, but also like, things need to iterate on, and that you can make it better and so on. So I think I'll just wrap it up with this one thought on this, the whole AI part. I think like anything else, I like to think about it as like, there's like a ladder, you try and like get to a certain state with like your company, and you try and like, build this so you can get that and so on. There's probably at least like 100 rungs. And the best you can do as kind of a tiny company is like worry about how do we get to the next 3, 4 rungs in the ladder with a very good sight on where are we trying to head and like, this is the right ladder to climb. But if you start solving like 98 to 100 at day one, like, it's not just useless, but also it's like the wrong thing to do because now you've weighted the ladder differently. And so is the first version of a prototype meant to solve all the problems ever? Of course not, right? You get to a point where actually it validates the use case, but also you get something to your players that actually they can enjoy. And then like you get the luxury of worrying about like the next song and then so on. And so I think like that's a mental model from a company culture perspective I'm trying to instill and as we grow further, where like how do we actually do build these rungs, but build them in a way that actually gets us to have the luxury to think about the next ones while seeing them versus the other way around.
Having a business is so fun. I like to think.
Yeah.
It is. Okay, so you've raised money. You have a viral game. What are your plans? Where is your rung? Maybe not rung 100. Where do you want to be in 5 years? I don't know how far that is up the ladder.
No, definitely. I think that like we're very happy with like the early success with like obviously Echo Chess and the puzzle mechanic. There's a ton more to be done with that first underlying take on that medium if you want, and also other games and longer term like the platform I'm describing. But I think like specifically when we talk about Echo Chess, even in the short term, and I can't share a lot of specifics, but what I will share for sure is like, remember at the beginning I was saying like there's a point of view you can have on like you start with a strategy game and then you walk toward a puzzle game, or you start with a puzzle game and you walk toward a strategy game. And I think a strategy game is, I mean, they're both amazing. Obviously, we believe in this, right? But I think a strategy game is much more interesting because now you have the element of how other humans also are interacting with your decisions. And I think that adds a whole lot of complexity in that. And I think, interestingly, if you start, this is again like a highly opinionated perspective here, so maybe people are like, this is wrong, that's fine.
That's okay. People are cranky no matter what you do, so
no,
share
it's fine. It's fair.
Yeah.
It's fair. Look, there's good arguments on both sides. It's just like, I think the beliefs that I have at this point in time, at least, is that you can add some of the elements that, bring other players or other humans into the experience, just as a kind of layer on its own, like, hey, like, let's add multiplayer on something or whatever. And I think on its own, it has interesting meta and depth, whatever. But if you just add it on its own or something that doesn't have like a foundation or basis, I think it falls flat, especially nowadays. I think like that's why my point of view was like, let's start with a puzzle game where if we just really nail even like the single player experience where people can have real fun and value. And obviously it's still like, early. We have something that people like and people who do really like, they actually really love and they stick around for a while. That's great. And God knows so many ways we can do it to actually just get it out in the world better. But I think even before thinking from like, what is it that we're building? I think like we're in a good spot where we've nailed this first. And and then we can think about like the strategy game element, which I'm excited about a lot, of course.
You're a classic CEO. You're infectious with your excitement. So I love that.
Thank you, Lizzie. Thank you.
Yeah. I have one last question for you. I know you have so much advice and so much insight from many different people that you mentioned. Congrats on getting into speedrun. That's awesome. But so far, what is the biggest aha moment you've had and who helped you get there? And I know business is aha moments all the time, but do you have one that you feel like really changed the course of your career, thought process, or game itself?
Yeah, I think like, I don't know how to link back exact things, but I'm gonna be biased. But I think like this is two things I think of. I think definitely that game like influenced me is like, Heroes of Might and Magic, as I mentioned. Love this game. Everyone's been involved in, even honestly, like the music composer, like beautiful. I still have these Spotify playlists to listen to them. On a different note though, I think there's an awesome game designer. You probably have him somewhere here. Vlado. This guy, Vlado Schwarz. I don't know if you ever played any of his board games. I haven't met him. Maybe someday I'll meet him. If he's into this, great, it'll be cool. He's in Czech Republic, I think. Awesome guy. So obviously I don't know anything about him as a human, but his work is amazing. I'll tell you why I think his work is great. He has such range. He's built games like Codenames, just party game, casual game, which is great. Also built games like Mage Knight, which probably requires like 3 hours of explanation and setup time, and then 15 hours as a game session. It's like very, very deep like strategy game. And like other games like Tashkalar, which is kind of like, like a abstract strategy, but also has like some kind of summoning and card battling mechanic. Anyways, this guy is a prolific board game designer and has done so many different ranges of elements of strategy games. And I think the nice thing that he does that all of us in the video game industry could actually all learn from. And probably being constrained by the board game medium gives you also certain nudges. But I think one thing that he does it really well is he thinks through, like, am I building a game for a certain mechanic and then adding theme later, or a building game for a certain theme and adding mechanics later? People have like sci-fi game and then figure out what is there. And I think he does an excellent job with building mechanics that are core to that theme. And like, they still feel like they can stand on their own a lot, but you feel like really immersed in that world. And as I mentioned, like, the guy just creates like from code names to like Mage Knights. So it's just fascinating. So yeah, as someone who loves turn-based strategy games, like board games, I think Vlado is great. Hopefully I meet him someday. Hopefully he's also a nice guy. I don't know, but
Oh my gosh, I think we'll send him this podcast and maybe he'll invite you to his house for dinner or something.
Cool.
Yeah, just reach out. You never know who will get back to you. It's pretty interesting. We've been talking to Sami Ramly, who's the founder of Echo Chunk AI. Sami, where can people go to play your game, work for you, contact you, learn more about you?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to try the game, just go to echochess.com. Echo like the sound, like ECHO chess.com. You also go to our website, the company Echo Chunk. You reach out to us any point you find the game there. Also, if you want to just email me directly, that's totally fine. It's just sami@echochess.com.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lizzie. That was a lot of fun.
Thanks so much for listening to the show this week. To catch all the latest from Here's Waldo, you can follow us on LinkedIn. Be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes. We'll see you next time.